very, very much for coming today. Thank you very much, Professor Shin, for the generous invitation to come and enjoy being part of this centre for a few days. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Farah Sheikh for being such a wonderful organiser, for organising all my travel, and for being brilliant in helping to arrange my visit. I want to start by saying I'm really very excited about the establishment of the Academy of Mobility Humanities here at Konkuk University. As many of you will know, Mobilities began as a distinctive subfield in the mid-1990s as a way of understanding the significance of movement in all of its incarnations to social life. And of course, at the turn of the century, many institutions, new institutions, were established that helped to cement the importance of mobilities research, such as the Centre for Mobilities Research at Lancaster University. Since then, it's been really, really gratifying, really exciting to witness the growth of many new mobilities networks around the world and seeing its influence grow. Through hubs such as the Mobilities Network in Europe, the Latin American Mobilities Network, the Aotearoa New Zealand Mobilities Network, the Australian Mobilities Research Network that I'm part of, and now the Academy of Mobility Humanities. And I understand that an Asia Mobility Research Network is part of the agenda for the Academy. I just want to say at this stage, I think that there are a few things that are particularly exciting about the development of these new institutions. Firstly, they enable our research and our ideas to travel and to be shared. And they allow and enable new collaborations between researchers. And of course, they also enable new ways of thinking, new ways of conceptualizing mobility that respond to different parts of the world, that respond to regional circumstances. And I think the last of these is most exciting to me. So at the Australian Mobilities Research Network, we're currently thinking about how mobilities research in our part of the world might be distinctive, might be unique in some way. And in terms of the kinds of theories and concepts that we develop. And so I'm especially excited about how the establishment of the Asia Mobility Humanities Institute here in Korea will help to develop new understandings of mobility that are based on ideas and thinkers that might not be so present in the publications and texts that have come to define our field so far. I think that's really exciting. I'm especially excited about the emphasis here in Konkuk on mobility humanities, because I think it foregrounds really strongly what I think is so distinctive and unique about mobility scholarship. So for me, a humanities approach puts questions of movement, transport and communication into dialogue with questions of meaning, with questions of interpretation, and questions of power. All of these things are centre stage. And of course, it also insists on taking the significance of bodies, of ourselves as humans, seriously in all of their vitality and their vulnerability too. So for me, it's this focus on the richness and complexity of bodily experience that attracted me to mobilities research in the first place. So growing up when I was young, I came to realise that so much of what I found fascinating about the world was all about the movements, the daily movements that people undertake. I love visiting. I come from the countryside. I come from a small village, and so on holiday I used to go and visit my grandparents in the city, and it meant a rare opportunity to take a train ride in the city and be immersed in a world that was completely unfamiliar to me, a really new world. And so much so that when I came to do my PhD, when I came to do my doctoral research, whilst much was being said by other academics about the exceptional kind of big one-off journeys involved in overseas tourism and in transnational migration, I realised that much, much, much less was being said about the more mundane, everyday journeys that we all take through our cities. So since then, over the past 15 years, I've been researching and writing about everyday mobilities for that reason. So rather than seeing our everyday travels as something humdrum, something boring, I've tried to look at them from a different perspective to show how they make us who we are, these everyday journeys. And to that end, I'm really, really thrilled that the Academy of Mobility Humanities has translated the book into Korean, and I'm grateful to the Academy for their support, especially to Wang Yun Park and Lee Chin Jong for their translation work, so thank you. In what remains of my time today, I want to give you a flavour of some of the key messages of the book. So if you've already read the book, some of this will be familiar, I hope. And you might recognise the pictures of it. So if you've ever been to New York, to Times Square, you might have noticed this poem behind me, which I'll read out. So, overslept, so tired, if late, get fired. Why bother, why the pain? Just go home, do it again. So this is rather a depressing art installation by Norman Culp called The Commuter's Lament, commissioned by the Metropolitan Transit Board in 1991. And when I first came across these lines, they seem to resonate because they zero in, they capture the life situation of many of the commuters walking beneath them every day. So they're both mocking and commiserating. They evoke obviously a really pessimistic sense of the overtired and overworked life of the commuter. Maybe we all feel that feeling. There are a few activities that beat through our everyday lives that have earned such dubious notoriety as commuting. So think about how particular words are often used so breezily to refer to this practice: nightmare, hell. The commuters are often being depicted in exactly these negative dystopian terms as a site of endless slog and drudgery, standing for all that's stressful and weary about our contemporary daily routines. Nobody, it would seem, likes to commute. But commuting is one of the most significant travel practices of our time. As Elwyn Brooks White said of New York, commuters give the city its tidal restlessness. We spend so much of our lives in transit to and from work. A survey in London reported that on average, in Britain, workers will spend 1 year and 35 days commuting in their lives. So 191,000 miles or 308,000 kilometres in their lifetime. So long distances. But of course, these journeys that all of us do every day are often so deeply routinized that it's very rare that we stop and actually think about them. The blindingly familiar world of traffic and travel has become so deeply grooved into the everyday life of cities that it often goes just unremarked upon. So you might be thinking, why should we be interested in commuting at all? Well, commuting times in many cities around the world are growing. So here in Seoul, I've learned that the average length of time spent commuting every day is just over 90 minutes. So that's the average. So a lot of variation there, as we know. In Bangkok, it's 3 hours. Yet transport infrastructure development has only grown at a fraction of the rate of demand. So cities all over the world, Mexico City to Milan, from Shenzhen to Sydney, transport infrastructures in many of our large cities are really at breaking point. We see it in the newspapers, we read about it all the time. In Mumbai, in India for instance, 7.5 million riders travel every day on some of the most overloaded trains in the world. Every day, there are 20 to 25 serious accidents, and between 10 and 12 people are killed every day in the commute. So dangerous. And apparently some stations even employ their own undertakers, which is very sobering to find out. Now, as if these headlines are not evidence enough, from a range of professional perspectives, there are many reasons why we should care about this. There are many reasons to be concerned about the prevalence. So, for transport professionals, the assumption of conventional travel modelling is that the travel time of the commute is just wasted time, just totally wasted. And this is of course echoed by economists for whom the commute is economically unproductive time. For environmentalists among us, this mass daily mobility is seen as a problem viewed in terms of carbon emissions and contributing to human-induced climate change, as well as detrimental localized effects of air pollution on city dwellers. For public health professionals, commuting means that many people are leading just more sedentary lives in seats all the time, wedged into seats and cars, public transports, which is increasing back pain and cardiovascular disease as well. So given that in the 21st century, even more people will be living, working, and moving around cities than ever before, commuting is clearly something that we need to understand better, we need to know about. Now, many of the problems that I've just referred to have prompted solutions. So, drawing on language often associated with human bodies, these solutions are about often removing blockages and making flows happen more effectively and efficiently to restore a city's healthy metabolism, as it often gets used here. Building more roads, investing in public transport, spreading the peak time of day that people travel more evenly, congestion pricing. These are some of the solutions, the practical solutions that governments, city governments are thinking about. And of course, transit-oriented planning is another thing that's come to the fore of planning, where public transport, active travel by bike and walking should be now at the forefront of development, rather than afterthoughts that are engineered in. So from this perspective, the solutions to commuting problems are about developing new infrastructure, changing the mode of transport that people use, changing when people travel and where people actually travel to. It seems simple enough. But, and this is the point in the book really, the whole point of the book, I think there's a bit of a problem with this. Because much of what we know about commuting, much of what city governments rely on to kind of understand commuting is based just on numbers, based on statistical knowledges. The commute is usually understood in terms of the number of people involved, the mode of transport that people use, the time that it takes for people to get to and from work, and the distances that people travel. And of course, this is useful. This is all useful information, but it only gives us a part of the story. A focus on these numbers, a focus on these aggregate statistics obscures the myriad things that are taking place below the radar, so to speak. There is evidence, a lot of evidence, that people's well-being is being significantly compromised by their commutes. But alarmingly, aside these large-scale diagnoses that commuting is bad, very little is actually known about how these journeys are changing everyday life. So how is commuting affecting the social fabric of urban life, striking right to the core of who we are? We might ask ourselves, would our lives really be better without commuting? Maybe they would be. Maybe they wouldn't be. Is commuting just a means to an end? So this question of how our everyday journeys are changing our lives every day, over months, years, and even lifetimes, is the question and challenge that my book took up. So I started out from a really quite different perspective. Rather than thinking about bodies as if they are fixed and bounded entities that move across the surface of the world, I drew on social theories in geography and in cultural studies that helped us to figure out that what bodies do, what they can sense, and what they can perceive doesn't stay fixed, but it actually changes in relation to what they do. That's the central premise of this book, really. So as philosopher Levi Bryant says, action itself transforms our capacity to be affected, the way that we sense and feel, by creating new capacities to be affected. So what we do changes the choices that we make. In other words, experience itself makes a difference. So what matters here is that these changes are not just internal to us, they're not just happening in our bodies. They've only happened because of our ongoing experiences of moving through our environments. So again, I suppose the central claim of the whole book is that rather than passively transporting us, these commuting journeys are actively changing us. So to explore the significance of the commute, I joined journeys in Sydney. So for those of you who have been to Sydney, Sydney suffers from some of the most critical transport predicaments that many other cities in the world face, where the fantasies of the good life seem perpetually compromised by the challenges of mobility. So it's a very similar story maybe to Seoul. So sustained economic prosperity in Sydney has created really uneven economic development, social development. It's created skewed settlement patterns, and most importantly for this seminar, profound infrastructure stress. So Sydney-siders have the longest commutes in Australia, although I have to say it's shorter than here in Seoul, averaging 35 minutes each way. So with an average commuting distance of 15 kilometres in Australia, they're the largest and longest commute of any city in Australia. Now from a distance, Sydney scores really highly in livability indices that compare the livability of the world's major cities. Now where other competitor cities have invested really heavily in their transport infrastructure, Sydney continues to trail. And confirming this accolade, a recent report stated that poor transport is simply Sydney's most fundamental drawback. Now, it probably comes as little surprise that I've been inspired by work in the new mobilities paradigm. And for me, this is important because it takes seriously the previously overlooked patchwork of travelling experiences that actually form our life worlds. And it explores how these journeys shape who we are and what they actually enable us to do. It invites us to think about the kaleidoscope of activities that spaces of mobility enable and the quality of social relations that these journeys facilitate. Now, for me, mobilities thinking also has a really powerful political dimension because it directs our attention to how the mobilities of some people, the movement of some people, can happen at the expense of the mobility of others. So this means that whilst mobility can help to alleviate, can help to reduce some forms of social inequality, it can also intensify other forms. So again, whilst from a transportation perspective, commuting journeys have often been understood as displacement from one point to another on a map. The mobilities paradigm helps us to appreciate how commuting journeys are intricately connected to so many other areas of our everyday life. So mobilities thinking provides important methodological tools to help us navigate these movements. And so over 4 years, I interviewed over 50 commuters in Sydney and stakeholders from government, and I did lots of ethnographic observations and photo experiments too, so it was a real kind of deep dive into this city. Now in transit life, I explore some of the various aspects of commuting. So there are separate chapters on skills, on dispositions, on spaces, on voices, on infrastructures. So rather than presenting a kind of broad overview, what I thought I would do in the time that I have today is just zoom in on one element that I found particularly interesting, and that element is time. Now what do I mean by time? Well, rather than understanding commuting time as a container or resource that can be measured, filled with activities, or exchanged for other things, I was really interested in this chapter in the book, thinking about time as something that is actively created through the experiences that we have. Now, of course, time is important because in Australia, as here, long commutes and sometimes actually over 100 kilometres each way are increasing. So developments in transport, but also in housing affordability pressures, this is what's created this. And in fact, John Urry says, 200 years ago, people on average moved 50 metres a day, mostly by foot. And now they move 50 kilometres a day, mostly by car and by plane. So it's a very contingent moment that we've reached. And I think this is also really interesting because very often there's polemic diagnoses made about how the disconnects between our distant outer suburbs and the inner city are pushing cities to breaking point. And the assertion is often made that dormitory towns on the edge of cities, are somehow bad, somehow detrimental to social cohesion. Now, of course, there are really important social inequality issues at stake. And for a start, yes, increase in fuel prices can disproportionately affect those people who live further away from their place of work. And so, as mobility thinker Katarina Manderscheid explains, mobilities constitute a significant stratifying force through which uneven life chances are being continually reproduced. However, generalised diagnoses about negative effects of these longer commutes, I think, can obscure the complexity of how long commutes, these super commutes, are actually being experienced and are being affected by their different situations. So what I want to do is just present 3 miniature portraits that glimpse some of the transformations that these super commuting journeys are giving rise to. So they're written in an impressionistic manner, and what I'm trying to do here is to draw out the intensities and the ambivalences that beaded the interviews themselves, whilst also highlighting the different temporalities that are narrated. So I'm going to go to each one in turn, starting with portrait number 1, which I call Paradise Found. So, for centuries in the deep, cool eucalypt forests of the Southern Highlands, south of Sydney, 150 kilometres away, the kookaburra's alarm call, that's a bird, has been the first to announce the morning. Just before first light, its hacking laughter shatters the silence, as if to signal the relief of having survived the hour of the wolf. But now the kookaburra is no longer the first harbinger of the new day. In a large 4-bedroom house on a remote acreage remote farm, a shrieking phone alarm call knifes through a woman's split-ended dreaming. Often Diane wakes a few minutes before 3:58 a.m. It's as if her body is anticipating the pain that this sound brings. The blinking luminous colon is unsympathetic to her sluggish neurons. She mustn't think there are no alternatives. Heave torso while swinging both legs out of bed. This is the only way to overcome the foggy force of the heavy blanket and heavier eyelids. The dream, it's still dancing faintly, is extinguished by the first doll's force of the day, the final ember from a magical masquerade. Walking by torchlight to the car, the black gum and white-topped box forests sag with nighttime dew. With handbag on shoulder, large coffee in left hand, torch in right, she opens the car door and scours for spiders, the poisonous nostril. Still a little scarred from past encounters, the surge of adrenaline wakes her up. She returns for her wheelie suitcase. The car's ignition startles a wombat that's crossing the driveway, unexpectedly dazzled by the headlights. Before the highway, a blanket of thick fog crosses the road, headlights illuminating the cloud from within. Dry ice for Stadium Rock as the radio is set to Triple M. Much later, on the highway, a barely perceptible band of azure blue is glowing low on the horizon, definitely there, silhouetting the distant treetops. Silently, its gradients become richer as cool greens are added, then flamingo pinks, then peaches, then golds. As it does, the landscape gains features and depth, rippling out on all sides to the furthest horizon. The tunnel etched by the headlights dissolves. She reaches into her handbag, gropes around for her necklace, earrings, and breakfast. By the city limit at Campbelltown, one of Sydney's furthest tentacles, she's accompanied by a flotilla of utes and trucks that are racing to service the city's construction boom. These concreters and builders start early to beat the city's unbearable late afternoon heat. On some days, one of these trucks might be her partner. Ships in the night, she says they are. This week, she won't see him until Friday. She's staying with some friends in the city. She doesn't want to drive back every night. Sometimes, if he can get an hour's break, she will meet him for a cup of tea in the city during the week. She turns off the highway at Fairfield Road to avoid the worst of the M5 tunnel build-up. Very famous. Here, the high noise barriers along the highway fall away to reveal a more riotous streetscape. Single-story brick houses, red roofs, tangled transmission wires, weatherboard fences, and wheelie bins. These give way intermittently to fast food joints and petrol stations, and little rows of shops that are still slumbering. Just before Ryde, there is a brief queue, the first of her journey, before she arrives at Chatswood, 2.5 hours after she set off. She's upbeat about the commute. I was really surprised about this. She's always done a long commute to a job that she really enjoys. She loves driving. She says she's done this one for 12 years. It takes a certain type of person, she says. She's a manager for an IT company. There isn't any work in the Highlands. Weekends home are sacrosanct. They don't see a soul. Gangs and yellow-tailed cockatoos, birds. They've built a relationship with no one here. Her daughter has just moved out. Like her partner, she only sees her at the weekend. She could have done with having me around, she says, but when they were together, she made sure that it was always quality time. This is the price I pay for living in paradise, she says. So, what to make of this? Well, on first glimpse, it might be really tempting to evaluate Diane's experience through the figure of the tree changer, that's what they call in Australia. This relatively new phenomenon where wealthy city people move out of the city in search of an idealized rural refuge. Now, certainly her managerial economic capital, combined with her social capital of having accommodating friends to stay with on some weeknights, sustains this lifestyle choice, as it's called. Yet, given the forces of traffic and commuting are reportedly two of the key motivations for tree changers, Diane's portrait clearly bucks these assertions. Diane has never lived in Sydney. Her working life has always been shaped by supercommuting. In this respect, we can imagine that her body has become so accustomed to this commuting rhythm that for others would just be inconceivable. Imagine doing that every day. So accustomed that her body anticipates a morning alarm. As philosopher Felix Rabaison's understanding of habit suggests, the more that we do something, the easier it becomes, and the less it impresses on sensation, and the more sharply our perceptions of that activity become, a bit like wine tasting or something like that, playing a musical instrument. Such sharpening is clearly evident from her detailed attention to the pleasurable transitions in her morning journey from the world of the Southern Highlands to the centre of the largest city in Australia. Yet what I think is so distinctive about Diane's portrait is the temporal rhythm that her supercommuters carved out between weekdays and weekends. Now, given that her relationships with her partner and daughter resemble a new form of household that some have called living apart together, weekends are fiercely preserved as important quality time for the family. As if compensating for the hypermobility that characterises her week, weekends are resolutely sedentary, still, spent in the solitude of the bush. Okay, so portrait 2 I've called Life on Hold. So wind chimes sound at 04:50 a.m. Over 200 kilometres away from the Southern Highlands, another woman wakes to a mobile phone alarm on her bedside table in a small house in a Central Coast town. Kelly changes the alarm sound every few weeks, as each sound, however mellow at the start, soon grows spikes and turns sour, but it comes to be so intimately coupled with her uninterrupted sleep. Me too. Her fingers are desperate to hit the snooze, but with just enough willpower she relents. She creeps out of bed to avoid waking her partner, although perhaps not as quietly as she might. After all, he will sleep for another 2.5 hours. She will text him later when she arrives at work. Up you get, wakey wakey. This 4-year well-oiled routine means that she can shower, dress, and be out of the door at 5:20. She drives 25 minutes to Gosford, the main station in her part of the world, where all the trains stop. The car park that you can only get parked before 7 a.m. is a small consolation that the early start provides. Winters here are hard, drenched from head to foot between the car and the train, even with an umbrella, waiting for the traffic lights to change. She wishes she could drive all the way. Of course, her colleagues drive. She even has a car parking space at work. The 1980s business park where she works in administration in North Sydney was built for the car. Filling the petrol tank every 2.5 days is far too expensive, especially as she now has a mortgage. At the station, she has 10 minutes to walk, sometimes more. The 5:57 train never leaves on time. With the other morning people who stand on the same place on the platform to board the same carriage, number 3, sit in the same seats. She knows what they do, where they live, what people do at weekends. The afternoon people are different somehow. The 5:57 is for sleepers. You certainly don't talk, it's one of those unspoken rules. The new train seats look nice, but they're not practical for sleeping. The angle is slightly different to the seats on the old tin cans that had cushioned green leather that you could just sink into. These seats are hard and uncomfortable. The person who designed them clearly didn't sit in them for 4 hours a day. There are some tall people she knows who avoid catching the new trains. She wakes up just before Epping. Most times, wind chimes are not needed. Sometimes a guy who sits near to her will tap her on the shoulder. Carriage 3 always makes sure that nobody has slept through. She hardly sees her husband, save for the weekend. He's a lucky person with his 15-minute commute and his ability to side-skip household chores. There is no quality time at the end of the day. Once you've said hello, talked about your day, discussed dinner, made dinner, cleaned up, made lunches, it's already bedtime. Maybe a quick crush on the coat in the couch with a little mindless telly, and then you're done. Weeks go by where she won't do anything when she gets home. Can't be bothered. A quick 10-minute meal will have to do it again. Certainly no energy to exercise. She never gets a full night's sleep. There just isn't time. She goes to bed early, but she can't sleep. Mind's still whirring. There is still so much going on. Weekends are luxury time, even though they're spent catching up with the rest of life that is being put on hold until then. Groceries, housework. You don't move more than you absolutely need to. It's not going to be forever, that's what she keeps telling herself. You can't do it forever. It'll kill you. It's a chore. It's a struggle. You don't do it for fun. These words soothe, taking away the heat away from the 4 years that she's already done. She says she'll do it for another year. Then she'll take a pay cut and work on the coast. She worked out the other week that she's away from home for 64 hours a week. She doesn't get paid for 64 hours a week. Half of her day is getting to work and back. Eventually, she will get home at a decent hour, without the uncomfortable afternoon commute in carriage number 3, chitter-chatterers who haven't been up since the early hours, without missing the connecting train by 1 minute yet again. Eventually, I will take care of myself, she says. Now, compared with Diane, Kelly's portrait indicates a rather different temporal orientation to the supercommute. The gendered nature of temporality, or what Arlie Hochschild refers to as a woman's second shift, is more acutely evident here. The inequality between Kelly's supercommute and her partner's relatively short commute is exacerbated by her assertion, tinged with overtones of resentment, that he shirks on the housework that she ends up having to do in the little time that she has left when she gets home or at the weekend. Palpable in her portrait is the time squeeze that she experiences through the succession of chores that leaves precious little free time for her, even at weekends. Her commute becomes part of this unpaid labouring activity. Contrasting with Diane's greater material privilege, the financial pressures that Kelly narrates through her mortgage commitments, her inability to drive, and her implied envy at her colleagues brings into view how the long commute is acutely mediated by the demands of capital. So this again seems to underscore Henri Lefebvre's concerns about the time of capital encroaching on free time. Yet as Kelly implies, it's not just that the time commuting takes away from her free time, but how the momentum of her succession of chores cannot be easily subdued, her mind still racing as she tries to sleep. Yet perhaps strikingly, what's most striking about Kelly's portrait is maybe how she defers her own ethical obligations to her self-care have effectively been deferred until a future time. Indeed, paradoxically, it's this anticipation of a future that does not involve supercommuting that makes the commute just about bearable. A spectral future life on the coast is brought into the present as a way of coping with the material discomforts that she narrates. Until then, there are small consolations that sustain her. The transient community that exists in Carriage 3, the small gestures of generosity at Epping. And lastly, to Portrait 3, which I've called Oscillations. Another alarm sounds later still at 5:30 in the Blue Mountains, over 100 kilometres, this time west of Sydney. Mike drags himself out of bed. He enters the day slowly. He drives 10 minutes to the station to catch the 6:49 train to get a bus to be at work 5 minutes early. There are no buffers here. 30 seconds can add 30 minutes. 30 seconds delay can add 30 minutes. He says you're on edge all the time. 5 hours in transit every day is already enough. The other day the train didn't come, just didn't come. There were no announcements. You ring and you try to find information and they say, yeah, we can put you through to complaints. You don't want to complain, you just want the train. He tries driving every so often, especially when he's become frustrated with the train, and the car is exhausting. When you get to the M4, the motorway, the traffic just stops. You have to contain yourself. How long is it going to be? It's a little better now. They have an indicator sign up. Penrith, Cumberland Highway, 15 minutes. He got there once, it was 50 minutes. At least knowing that it's 50 minutes, you can relax more. But people still don't like that. It's nothing compared to how people feel when they're faced with something that they do not know. The consolation is important. You read about what a state the transport system is in. A response like, look, we're sorry, works, it changes things, it does make a difference. Transitioning between train and car is only short-term relief. It's the same sort of stress that you have on a train. It just happens in cars a little bit different. He says it's these waves. You maybe swap from the train to the car and something happens, and the next night something happens. You're just sick of it, and then you swap back to the train, and it seems to be okay for a while, and then something happens, and you stick to it a bit longer, and then you drop back to the car. He left Sydney 10 years ago, just wanted to get away. Certain things happened. He says he didn't really think it through, so the commute was there. But if someone told him that he'd be doing this in 10 years, the pinnacle was a few years ago where it was just too much. The whole thing falls apart. He had a car accident. He fell asleep at the wheel. He says he was just tired or exhausted. Everything became just too much and too stressful. He says then those times when a train is late take on a whole new meaning, and it gets you much more anxious. Until a year ago, it seemed to be endless. He says, oh my God, I bet I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Banal frustration curdling through vertiginous existential angst. He says you can't look at commutes without looking at everything else. It interacts with everything, even though it's the same commute. You can't package the commute and the home. Some people might be able to do that, but he can't. He says during good times, the commute is really good, and you can just cope with everything. He says at this present time, he's not in a space where he just wants out of it. He says it's probably the only space that he can get during the day to have his own time. Even though it isn't yet. That comes and goes according to what else is going on. He says, if you're not getting enough sleep at home, you're cranky and everything just snowballs. The commute then becomes a persecutory object. It's as if the train has something against you. The system is conspiring to add to the misery of your life, and this restlessness, and the restlessness which is ongoing, is very much like a train on the tracks. You just feel like you're losing control, especially if in other parts of your life you don't have control. You're at everyone else's whim all the time. All of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, you're just out of control. You're part of this relentless sort of conspiring system that's just going to keep you there, wherever you are, for the rest of your life. People look at him aghast where he says where he comes from and where he works. He has to put a lot of stuff on. He has to give it to other people to do because he just doesn't get time in each place. Things like doctors and dentists, you really have to think 10 times before making an appointment, because it means taking time off work or leaving work early and having to work and struggle around trying to do that. He says there are parent-teacher nights coming up in 2 weeks. He's going to have to now plan 2 weeks ahead to try and get away half an hour early so he can make it up. He says he finds himself just a little bit alone. Nothing deeply traumatic, just a dull shade of Payne's grey. He'll have been in this town in the Blue Mountains for 13 years and he still feels that he's not part of the community because of this back and forward. He's a bit disconnected from the whole community up there. He said part of this is his personality. He says, I'm not a community person, even at the best times. He says he should be more connected than he is, and he's realizing that he's not. He's finding it hard to do that. He says, I'm a little bit all over the place. His partner is based up there, and she does a lot of things, so he has to balance it out. He tries very hard to plan something for the weekend. He says that he has to be a bit more focused. It's not necessarily a pleasurable thing. So where Diane's portrait evokes a strong sense of sovereignty that comes freighted in the term lifestyle choice, a self-assured trope that's often associated with supercommuting, Mike's more melancholic portrait gives a much more hesitant, even stuttering rationale for his supercommuting circumstances. Although he implies that he needed to distance himself from a difficult situation, he plays his cards close to his chest. Even with this ambiguity, a car accident serves as the punctum of his portrait, piercing and spreading out. His reflections on the exhaustion that gave rise to this event resonates with literary theorist Lauren Ballant's concept of slow death, a condition that describes, in her words, the physical wearing out of a population and the deterioration of people in that population. Now this concept, I think, is useful here, given that it refers to, again to quote Ballant, temporal environments whose qualities and whose contours in time and space are often identified with the presentness of ordinariness itself, that domain of living on. Crucially, and pertaining to Mike's account, slow death happens, again to quote Ballant, where life building and the attrition of human life are indistinguishable. Such a tension seems to resonate with Mike's life pressure as well. especially those moments where he teeters on the brink of spiraling out of control. So this idea of like building and like attrition seemed to alternate for Mike. If the temporality of Kelly's portrait evokes oscillations, is characterized by deferral, Mike's portrait evokes oscillations. His access to both train and car commuting allow him to switch between the two modes. Yet this switch is less a result of his actively choosing and more brought about by the tipping points that his ongoing frustrations lead to. In his portrait, he poignantly captures how the affectivity of his commute is irreducibly contingent on what else is going on in his life. So an ostensibly similar happening can be sensed very differently depending on his present circumstances, or whether the transport company provides a gesture of consolation. So this differential sensing can redraw his experience of time, such that the commute can be endless or not. Particularly striking is how his commute is both the only time he gets to himself and, conversely, an object of persecution. So for me, this productive ambiguity in his portrait stems from these seemingly inconsistent dispositions being held together in tension. So similar tensions mark his glum reflections on not being part of his home community, whilst at the same time accepting that such a disposition does not necessarily suit him. So, where does all this get us, you might well ask? What I've tried to do here is show different sorts of pressures that lengthy commutes can create. So each portrait hints at the temporal strategies that supercommuters develop to survive these pressures. So in each, the lure of the weekend for the first one. In the second one, the anticipation of an end to commuting. In the third one, changing modes of transport. Each promise survival of sorts. Now the concept of precarity might be useful here, drawing attention to working experiences characterized by insecurity, temporariness, and low pay owing to broadly neoliberal employment policies. Now, although the participants in my project undertook a wide range of occupations, important here is how precarious labour is not just about the job itself, but it's intertwined with other areas of life. So where other scholars have suggested that household dynamics and welfare provision are some of the other areas that can lead to precarity, what some of the stories here reveal is that commuting can also play an important but overlooked part in contributing to a precarious life. Reflecting on the super commutes undertaken by Kelly and Mike, their accounts invoke a series of bodily vulnerabilities created through their commutes. So these are lives seen pushed to the limits by commuting, teetering on the brink of what is just about bearable. So this is where the commute turns into a chore for Kelly, or perhaps more intensely for Mike, an object of persecution. Where some academics have indicated that precariousness is characterized by an inability to predict one's fate, for Mike especially, it feels like it's his inability to escape a commuting fate that pushes him to the edge. And yet, perhaps most importantly, to make a firm diagnosis of what exactly commuting time is doing to us would overlook the nuances, the complexities that feed these portraits, and indeed all of the interviews that I did for my project. So a firm diagnosis is insensitive to the changeability of these experiences. As Mike suggests, there are times where the commute becomes too much, yes, but there are also times that the commute is really good. Whilst recovering from the commute might involve radically changing one's working life, such as retraining to a new career, and a later part of the book describes one such occurrence, it might also involve more incremental routine changes. Now it's through these subtle changes and becoming attuned to how they're working on us that we might become, I think, better equipped to cope with these commuting times. Okay, and I'm going to briefly conclude now. So at a time where the transport challenges that beset so many of our cities are being felt more acutely than ever before, I think there is no better time than now for a refreshed understanding of what our commutes might be doing to life in our cities. Where previous analyses of commuting have tended to champion hard infrastructure investment or technological innovations. The events and encounters that I've been charting in my book indicate how changes in these domains, of course, might be part of the solution to commuting problems, but they're not silver bullets. I'm really careful throughout the book not to make any large-scale diagnoses, large-scale grand narrative about what people want or what should be done. A generic picture, a generalized picture, would flatten the richness of transit life, where the dim vagaries that make life what it is, with its split ends and non-resolutions, become formalized to such an extent that its intensities are blunted. Such moves would assume, of course, that commuting is the same for all people, all of the time. As sociologists Monica Boucher and John Urry point out, it's much more interesting to learn about how exactly people make up their journeys than trying to find and define underlying orders, rules, and structures, which is what a lot of social science is obviously preoccupied with. More modestly, the intention of this project and the book, which I'm very excited is now brilliant, was to change how we might think about commuting. So rather than imagining the events and encounters that make up the commute to be either the mere playing out of large-scale social processes that have been diagnosed by commentators, or conversely, trivialities whose significance we should be careful not to overinflate. This book spotlights how the events and encounters of the commute are the very things that are changing people's lives in this liminal, in-between zone. A zone where the tensions and contradictions, the diverse influences and desires that are our lives, come to the fore in ways that are sometimes wonderful, sometimes sobering, but always and hopefully intriguing. Thank you.